So the agenda that I have here is, like I've told you in the initial 3 slides, I'll spend some time on helping you understand what the exam or the certification is all about. And then I will give you a glimpse of what are the various domains in CISSP. And then we'll deep dive into domain one of CISSP. Towards the end of the topics that we cover in domain one, right? So I mean, practically given the time frame, I might not be able to cover all the domains within, sorry, all the topics within domain one. So we will pick a few important ones where we will deep dive, and we'll also see how the questions in those domains would be, just some illustrative questions for you to get a grasp of the exam. And then if there are any further questions which you'd like me to answer, if the time serves, happy to be of support, right? Okay, moving on. All right. So the first slide we're going to talk about is around CISSP certification, and how is the CISSP certification a gateway to your cybersecurity leadership, right? So CISSP stands for Certified Information Systems Security Professional Certificate, right? And this is governed by an organization called as International Information System Security Certification Consortium, which is ISC square, right? International Information, that is I square, System Security S square, Certification Consortium, ISC square, right? So that's the governing body that provides this certification, right? And CISSP, most of you who joined the call might already be aware of it, that it's a globally recognized certification in cybersecurity. Now, you pick across any job description that you come across in LinkedIn for somebody who's like 5 or 8 plus years of experience, you'll most likely see a CISSP certification as a requirement as well, right? So that's about it. And an interesting thing about this certification is it just doesn't stop at testing your technical abilities, right? Rather, it also tests your managerial abilities as well, because, like I've told you in the title of the slide itself, right? This is about transcending your career into a cybersecurity leadership, right? And then CISSP also opens door to leadership roles, and obviously leadership roles comes with higher earning potential. That is all that we all aim to achieve, right? Um, Great career satisfaction and higher earning potential, right? So that's a bit about CISSP certification and what is the body that governs it and what are the benefits that you get. CISSP exam has these 8 domains that all of us will have to, study, prepare, and go before the exam. Domain one is security and risk management, where we will spend some time today. And then you have asset security. Domain three is security architecture and engineering. Domain four is communication and network security. Domain five is identity and access management. Domain six, security assessment and testing. Domain seven, security operations. Domain eight is software development security. Right. So today we'll cover a few topics in domain one. Right, in the coming sessions, if you choose to be associated with us, we will go deeper and gain and share knowledge and expertise around the other domains as well. Moving on. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold and cough, so just excuse me. Um, if it interrupts your flow. I'll try to minimize that, but that's how it is. Right. Now, coming to the exam format, right? CISSP is a computerized adaptive test, right? So, computerized adaptive test, as in, let's say you start off the exam, CISSP throws on your screen a medium level difficulty question, right? Now, if that medium level difficulty question you answer it correct, then CISSP throws a hard, difficult, you know, a high difficulty question on your screen. If you answer that, it might, go to an even higher or maintain that level of complexity or difficulty in terms of the questions. But if the first question is wrong, it lowers the difficulty of the question, right? But the lower difficulty questions, for you to pass the exam, you'll have to answer more number of questions, right? So that is the range. That is why the range is 100 to 150 questions. The harder questions you answer, your exam gets completed, sooner. Okay. Now, the duration of the exam is 3 hours, right? Um, and then there are also 25 questions which are unscored. It's basically for the exam to assess your capability, right? Now, another key thing is that you cannot revisit your previous question. You have to submit it and then move forward, right? So we'll have to be 100% sure when we're submitting the answer. You cannot revisit it. And the passing score is 700 out of 1,000, approximately 70%. The languages it is available in is English, Chinese, German, Japanese, and Spanish. So they have a retake policy as well. So in a year, there are around 3 to 4 times that you can retake, but you cannot take it consecutively. There's a cooling off period. For example, you see after the first attempt, the cooling off period is 30 days. After second, it is 60 days. Third is 90 days. And there's a retake fee, which is the full exam fee that you'll have to bear. Now, after you pass the exam, right, the story doesn't end there. Any of your acquaintances or friends who is already a CISSP professional will have to endorse you. Endorse you as in that they know you, that you come with good ethics and good behavior. And then also they're aware of your experience in cybersecurity, right? For that you are showing, right? So CISSP is provided to people who are experienced in cybersecurity, right? So the person who's already cleared the exam will have to endorse you on that. Now, another interesting thing which I'd like to share with all of you is that ISC Square, which is the governing body, which we spoke in the previous slide, comes up with this interesting offer called as peace of mind, right? To where you get a 1+1 sort of a try to the exam at a very minimal fee that you'll have to bear in excess, right? So even if you don't happen to pass in the first attempt, it'll give you a free second attempt for that small margin of extra fee that you pay, right? For more details, you can visit the ISC Square, a website for most updated details, right? I've flashed that link, but then if you Google ISC Square and CISSP, it'll pop up on your screens, right? And this is a bit about the exam questions. So mostly you will get 4 options, multiple choice questions. Some are scenario based. Some have multiple correct selections, which is out of the 4 options that you have on your screen, 3 might be correct, right? So it will ask you to choose multiple correct selections. So that is where the difficult part is, right? Um, and there might be questions which say like choose the best or choose the least incorrect answer. So when you go for choose the best, there might be 4 options which might seem correct to you, but you'll have to weigh all of these 4 options, compare them, and choose the best out of all of those, right? Now, then there will be some advanced formats as well, like drag and drop, hotspot, but these are very rare. But then, people have experienced them coming in their exam. Now, important rules, like we have discussed, there is no going back. You have to be 100% sure. And CISSP doesn't reveal. For example, I told you, I mentioned to you about there is a requirement for multiple correct selections in this type of question, right? So out of 4, 3 might be correct. Now, if you've taken a calculated guess and if you made a selection of 2 out of those 3, right? Ideally, we should mark 3 out of 3, but you're marked 2 out of 3. So we really do not know if CISSP gives us marks for that or not, right? So your best choice, what you have is you have to mark all the three questions correctly, right? So that's about CISSP does not reveal whether it gives partial credit on multi-part questions. So we do not have a clarity, right? Next is there's a 3 hour limit for the 150 questions that we need to answer. Um, a few smart test taking tips, right? For all, since we have to answer all of the questions before you move forward, right? There is no option of going back. When you do not typically know an answer for a question, right? The option that you have is that you have to eliminate all the wrong options, right? Look at the question, read the options, and eliminate all the wrong options, right? So that will improve your chances of winning, right? And now, when there are double negatives or absolute words, double negatives are I do not know nothing, right? That's an example of double negative. I do not know nothing means that there is a chance that that person knows something about it, right? So, several times CSSP throws certain tricky questions with double negatives or absolute words like always, never, forever, all, right? So you have to be careful when these things come up in your questions. The next thing is understand option relationships, right? So when you're guessing, are there any parent and child sort of a relationship in the options? See if you can eliminate them. Or between a parent and child, you only have to select a parent, right? Understand the different categories of options. Understand if there are any opposites within the options, right? So within, if there are opposites, most likely one of these two is correct, right? Bo- it is not a possibility that both of these will be correct since they're opposites, right? So you can follow all of these tips when, especially when you do not know the answer to the question with 100% surety, right? Develop a good guessing strategy. The more you practice of CSSP test papers, the better your analysis of identifying the correct answer will be, right? Uh, Another thing is that it's a 3 hour exam. Even if you go for breaks, the clock still keeps ticking, right? So these are like at a meta level what exam is, what CSSP is, and all of that. Right now, let's try and spend some time around what the domain one is all about, right? So so these are the questions that we have, or these are the topics that we have in the domain one of CSSP, which is around security and risk management, right? So you have topics such as ethics, security concepts, governance, compliance and law, investigations, policy framework, business continuity, personal security, risk management, threat modeling, supply chain risk management, awareness and training, right? So domain one happens to occupy 16% of your total exam questions, right? So domain one is important, and it is it's a domain that has the highest percentage of questions coming to your exam, right? So today, given the brevity of time that we have, I'll be spending some time around understanding, sorry, discussing the concepts around ethics, security concepts, governance, and policy framework. All right, moving on. So, understanding professional and organizational ethics, right? So, I'm sure all of us come across the topic of ethics in our day to day life, right? Whether that being the society that we live in or that being the organization that we go to, right? So we come across ethics in some form of the other, right? So let's take an example of somebody, of an individual, right? So let's say this individual's name is Sai, which is myself, right? And then there is another organization called as ABC, right? It's a banking organization called ABC. Let's call it that, right? And then you have another person who is an employee of an organization and who happens to be from cybersecurity, right? Now, in some form of the other, all these three people will have to abide to ethics, right? Ethics are basically moral codes or rules of personal behavior. Since we all live in society, we all interact with each other, right? We'll have to follow certain rules when we interact with each other, right? So Sai, who's an individual, right, in his everyday societal life, will have to follow certain rules of personal behavior. Now, in the context of business, right, ethics will describe how a business should govern itself to ensure its actions are appropriate and justified, right? For example, the organization uh, cannot go with a lot of unethical behavior as well, right? Since the organization is also operating in a society, all of its actions will have to be appropriate and justified, right? Now, similar to how ethics are applicable to SAI and this banking organization, right, or a business, cybersecurity people have a similar level or even more higher ethical responsibility, right? Because the jobs that we deal with could cost millions of dollars, could cost even lives of people, right? So we need to have the utmost responsibility. So all our cybersecurity professionals must ensure they act in a manner that their actions are appropriate and justified in the society, right? So cybersecurity people need to be very careful and they need to abide by their organizational ethical responsibility guidelines, right? And CISSP also proposes the same. Now let's look at what is an organizational code of ethic, right? Now we looked at size, we looked at a business ethics, and then we looked at a cybersecurity ethics. Organizational code of ethics is every organization has its own code of ethics, right? That is published. And why is it published? Is it helps everyone in the organization to guide their day-to-day work, right? For example, a company like TCS will have thousands of employees, right? Now the CEO of that company might not have time to spend time with all of these employees and help them with their day-to-day ethical responsibilities, right? Let's say if I'm talking to a vendor, right? So there are certain aspects of ethics also out here, right? Can I accept a gift from a vendor, right? Can the vendor book tickets for me for a business trip, right? All of these are ethical decisions and ethical choices. Now, if there is an organizational code of ethics in the form of a document, I can refer to that document and take a necessary call, right? Can I accept a gift from a vendor? If the ethical code of, organizational code of ethics says, if the gift is more than $10, right? I should not accept it. If it's a small gift that we exchange as a gesture, I might accept. If that is what the organization document or policy is saying, I can happily accept it, right? So this organizational code of ethics is helping me navigate conflict of interest, confidentiality, discrimination, etc. So it's helping the employee make decisions, right? So that is about ethics and organizational ethics, right? So the important thing that we'll have to pick up from here is several times or many organizations come up with their organizational code of ethics, and it could come out in the form of their policies and procedures, or they might come up with a separate high level document if they choose to, right? But usually there is a reference for employees to look at and make their decisions for the day to day activities, right? Now, similar to organizational code of ethics, right? We also have code of ethics coming in from ISC Square, right? ISC Square also comes up with the code of ethics. So it has one preamble and four canons. Preamble is basically, um, it's an introductory statement of purpose. Introductory statement of purpose. Whereas a canon is a ethical rule or obligation. Sorry, ethical rule, right? It's an ethical rule or obligation. Now, what does the preamble say? The preamble says that the safety and welfare of society and the common good, duty to our principles and to each other, requires that we adhere and be seen to adhere to the highest ethical standards of behavior, right? Therefore, strict adherence to this code is a condition of certifications. So, tomorrow, after all of you get certified, right? If we happen to deviate from this code of ethics, right, in our day to day responsibilities, let it be either when it comes to society, or if you see the safety and welfare of society is one aspect, and it also speaks about duty to our principles, right? If you see here, it talks about duty to our principles and it talks about welfare of society, right? So we'll have to ensure, we as CISSP professionals, that we stay true and just to the welfare of the society and also to our principals. Principals are people who recruit us, right? People who hire us in their organizations. So we have to show utmost responsibility and sincerity to the job that is provided by the organization, right? I hope the code of ethics preamble is clear. Now, these canons basically explain what the main purpose of the preamble is, right? So we'll go one after the other. The first one is protect society, the common good, necessary public trust and confidence, and the infrastructure, right? So it basically means that we'll have to be very sincere and highly responsible towards the society and the common good, right? Society as a whole. The next one is act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally, right? So CSSP or ISC Square is suggesting that we act honorably and justly, honestly, responsibly, and legally, because when you when you work towards your job with utmost sincerity and honestly, right, that is when the person who is receiving an advice from you from a cybersecurity perspective will trust you, right? If the other person does not trust the accuracy of the guidance that you're giving as a cybersecurity professional, then we are not meeting the ethical rule here or the canon, right? So you'll have to be utmost sincere to the responsibility of your job, right? That is when the other person will actually trust you. The next one is provide diligent and competent service to the principals. So we have discussed this in the preamble. Principals are people who recruit you. You have to provide service to your organization with utmost sincerity, and you'll also have to protect the infrastructure of the organization that you're deployed at, right? So that's about the third canon. The fourth one is advance and protect the profession, right? So this is more about self-education and contributing to the cybersecurity and the CSSP community. So out here, you'll have to ensure that your knowledge is most up to date with the industry requirement, right? So ISC Square, um, so I live out of Bangalore. So ISC Square organizes monthly meetups, right? Where people from different industries, people from different levels within the cybersecurity field come and exchange knowledge, right? And it's a monthly activity that happens. So every time we attend this event and gain knowledge, right? ISC Square provides us with something called as CPE credit points, which is your continuous professional education points. So whenever we educate ourselves, we would be provided with CPE points. Now, for a CSSP professional, ISC Square mandates around 120 points for a period of 3 years now, right? So this keeps changing, but this is what I'm sharing with you for your experience, right? So in a span of 3 years, you'll have to gain 120 points, CPE points, right? If not, there are chances that your CSP certification might not be extended further, right? So you'll have to ensure that you are continuously educated. And this canon also says that you'll also have to contribute to the community, right? You'll also have to contribute to the community's common body of knowledge, right? So adhering to these code is mandatory for CISSP certification. So the code of ethics plays a major role because if any of your other employees in the organization or your colleagues or friends find any of our activities as not aligning to code of ethics, then they can raise a complaint to ISC Square, right? And then there are chances that there might be certain disciplinary action from ISC Square that they might impose on us, right? So it's important that we follow ISC Square's code of ethics, right? I'm presuming I've spent enough time and I'm moving forward. Okay. Now, before we head on to the next topic, let's spend some time and understand. We often hear this that security is very important, but why is it so important, right? Security is important because it helps businesses continue despite threats. Threats might come in the form of data thefts, or threats might come in the form of physical or logical damage to your assets, right? So that is why it is most important, right? Security is an element of business management. It is not an IT activity, right? So a lot of people think that security is a cost or security is a technical stuff, right? Of course, it is technical, but more than technical, it is a business managerial tool, right? It's a business management tool because what you're doing at the end of the day, you are ensuring that the business is resilient and business is operational, right? Another aspect to talk about here is security's comparison with IT, right? Several people think that security and IT are almost the same, right? Now, what is IT? IT is basically hardware and software that supports the business of a company, right? Or that supports the operations of a business. Now, where is coming to security? Security is the business management tool that ensures the reliable and protected operation of that IT layer, right? You see that? So IT is about hardware and software that supports the operations of business. Security is about a business management tool that ensures that the IT is reliable and protected, right? So if security of an organization is not up to the mark, you might be seeing in news that There are so many lawsuits going. There are so many fines that Europe has put up a lot of fines on companies such as Facebook related to GDPR or data privacy, right? Which is a security aspect. Now, you might have come across a tool called SolarWinds, and when there is a breach that happened, right, the company had to bear a lot of lawsuits where the vendors and clients who were making use of that tool have been have approached the court, right? Now, in another instance, when this Microsoft blue screen of death happened, right? You might have seen on the news that a lot of people in airports and transportation was halted because of the blue screen of death, right? And a lot of people have gone on to suing a software called CrowdStrike within Microsoft's processors, right? So when security goes for a toss, businesses do go for a toss, right? So that is why security is a business management tool, right? Now, to implement security, what do you need? So the first thing that you need to implement security is a security framework, right? So now, what is a security framework? So you might have come across, you might have heard of standards such as ISO 27001, right? You might have heard of NIST, you know, framework, right? NIST is a framework from US, and it is largely for US government departments follow it. But then the best part of NIST is that this can be customized to your organizations, right? And you can apply this framework to your information security or to implement your information security systems, right? Now, we understood why security is important and how security and IT do compare. And then what is that we need to implement security? We need a security framework like an ISO or an IST, right? Now, let's look at the next steps in the next slide, right? Now, once the security has been established, right, it's a continuous process, right? So, what do you have to do? You have to, let's say, security as a system is established. You establish a system. Now, from time to time, all of you also understand that the hackers or the adversaries on the internet are also getting themselves updated. They are advancing their security tools, right? And when they come and hit across this system from time to time, so if the security system is updated today, as of today, it might, it might provide you the defense against the attacks from hackers. But let's say 1 year down the line, when the hackers have become extremely more powerful because of the advancements in their hacking tools, right? Then this system might not take that hit, right? So what we have to do as information security or cybersecurity professionals is that from time to time we have to evaluate the system, we have to test the system and keep improving the system, right? So we have to keep evaluating the system and keep improving the system. Now there are these three ways in which you can evaluate the system, right? The first one is risk assessment, right? In risk assessment, what you do is we identify the assets. For example, let's say there is a bank, right? And bank has assets like there are servers which are deployed in cloud. There are servers in the data center. There are desktop computers. There are documents, physical documents, right? So all of these are assets to that bank. Now, the assets of the bank will have several threats, right? Now, because of those threats, the threats basically exploit vulnerabilities in those assets. For example, if there is a threat is of an unauthorized threat is of an unauthorized user, right? Let's assume threat is an unauthorized user. Then the unauthorized user can exploit an asset. Let's take an asset as a computer system, right? A computer system as your asset. Now there is a threat who is your unauthorized user. Okay. Now this asset is not password protected, not password protected, right? Now what is it? This is the vulnerability. Now this threat can exploit this vulnerability and get access to this asset, right? So this is called as risk assessment. So what we are doing is we are identifying an asset. We are evaluating what are all the threats that can exploit this asset. And on this asset, what are the vulnerabilities? For example, on this computer, if there is no antivirus, right? That is a vulnerability as well, right? This unauthorized user can exploit this vulnerability as well, and he can install a virus onto the system. Now, based on this analysis, we identify what is the risk to that particular asset, right? After we identify the risk of that asset, we implement something called as controls, right? Controls are basically corrective actions, right? So we have initially developed this system. Now we are doing a risk assessment of the system to continuously improve it, right? Now the next method of continuous improvement is something called as vulnerability assessment, right? So there are several tools today in the market, right? Tools such as something called as NASUS, right? Which is a vulnerability assessment tool. And then there is something called as QRadar, which is a vulnerability assessment tool, right? So there are certain tools which help us understand the vulnerabilities on different softwares or solutions. Now, when you look at the report of these tools, it will tell you what are the corrective actions as well, right? Corrective actions could be installing patches several times. It is around installing patches, right? Now, the next form of security evaluation is the penetration testing, right? So for the purpose of penetration testing, you have a trusted team of employees or trusted team of vendors who would act as ethical hackers, and these ethical hackers try to stress test your security environment from time to time, right? So they try to uh, trespass into your environment without you providing them access to it, right? So these ethical hackers try to stress test your environment from time to time from a security perspective, and then they will help you with a report at the end of their activity as to what are the controls that you need to implement, or what are the defenses that you need to implement in order to close all the doors and make your system secure. Now, if you do not invest time and efforts into penetration testing, so if not ethical hackers, unethical hackers will come and try to exploit your system, right? So to stay ahead of the adversaries or hackers, you will have to invest in all of these three. Let it be risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, or penetration testing, right? Now, few quick tips. One is that the corrective actions or the controls that you are implemented will have to be cost effective in nature. For example, let's say this asset, what you see on the screen of a desktop, which I mentioned, along with the data within that desktop, is worth $10,000. I've also considered the intellectual property value of the data within the. Now, let's say if a consultant approaches you and tells you that we'll have to implement a security solution around this desktop, which is worth $20,000, right? Should we invest in it? No, we should not be, because the control must be cost effective, right? So for a value of $10,000, if we'll have to implement a control of $20,000, that is not justified, because the budgets in an organization are always constrained, right? We do not have an infinite source of resources in an organization, right? So budgets are always constrained. So we have to ensure that the controls or the solutions that we are providing will also have to be cost effective. The next quick tip is we have to ensure, or we have to make our security legally defensible, right? For example, the example of solar winds, where I told you that this application is largely used in a lot of clients and vendors, and this application has a lot of data related to the business operation, critical data. Now, some attackers have exploited a vulnerability in this SolarWinds application, and what they have done is they have taken away this massive amounts of data. Now, because of this attack, right, the CISO of the organization was impacted. Now, when such a big thing has happened, affecting millions of records, a lot of clients, millions of dollars, right? And all of these clients will go and approach the court of law. When they approach the court of law, the CISO of this company will have an ethical responsibility to show to the court and prove that he has done his job well, right? That he has ensured that there is a risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. He has to produce all of those reports to prove that he is not guilty, right? So all our work as cybersecurity professionals also has to be legally defensible. So that is why we do a lot of documentation, right? Also remember that security is a journey, it's not a finish line, right? It's a continuous process, right? Where we do risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, penetration testings throughout, right? Now moving on. Now we'll talk a bit about, you know, what is a CIA triad, right? CIA is basically considered as the primary goal of information security or cyber security, right? CIA is basically stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Okay, so people usually represent CIA in the form of a triangle, right? So here it stands for confidentiality, integrity, and then availability. This is what CIA stands for, right? So they usually draw a triangle because whenever we are implementing security within an organization, depending on the business of the organization, the balance of this triangle also tilts, right? Let me give you an example. For example, if you are a security consultant who is working for a bank, right, you will largely focus more on confidentiality aspects of the controls, right? Because when you're working in a bank, uh, the information will have to be very confidential. You'll have to maintain the secrecy of the data, right, which is of paramount importance. Now, let's say that if you're implementing security controls for a e-commerce company like a Flipkart or an Amazon, then availability of the controls play a major role, right? So when I say major, it doesn't mean that confidentiality integrity will take a backseat, but then availability plays a paramount importance, because can you expect an e-commerce giant, to crash on a big billion day sale or something like that? These instances have happened, but then when they happen, when the applications crash on big billion days or important sale days, there are millions of dollars loss, right? So availability plays a key role there. Now, take for example, you're serving a healthcare company. Integrity of the data plays a major role there, right? So that is why it's called as a CIA triad, and the balance of CIA triad is very important. And you'll have to ensure as cybersecurity professionals that you align the controls based on the business need. Moving on, what is confidentiality, right? So confidentiality is it's basically protecting the secrecy of data from unauthorized access, right? So it's a I mean, going by the name, confidentiality is about protecting the secrecy of the data, right? Now, how do you ensure confidentiality? Is most important thing is basically the controls what we use for confidentiality are encryption, access control, classification, and training, right? Um, Encryption is basically you are changing the form of the data and storing it in your databases or while the data is in transit, right? So that the people or the adversaries do not intercept the data or do not understand the data. So encryption is the first most control. And then, since confidentiality is also about protecting the secrecy of data from unauthorized access, access control is an other control, right? Now, classification of the data is also important because let's say there are three data points. One is your name, the other is your phone number, the third is your bank password, right? So your name and your phone number, comparing your name and phone number is more critical, more confidential. Comparing your phone number and banking password is more confidential, right? So that is the classification, which is you need to know which data is of paramount importance and which is the data that you'll have to secure. So classification is important. And then training of people is important because people need to know how they need to handle data. For example, if they have, um, you know, 1,000 records of names of people, right? They need to know how they need to secure it. And for example, if in another instance they have, um, you know, passwords related to thousands of customers, they need to know how do they handle that. So people will have to be trained in adequacy, right? And then there are certain aspects of confidentiality like sensitivity, discretion, criticality, concealment, secrecy, privacy, seclusion, isolation. So these are all the aspects of confidentiality, which is sensitivity is you need to know how sensitive a particular data item is, right? Like I told you, name is name, phone number, and banking password. Banking password is the highest sensitive, right? So you need to be able to identify that. So these are all the various concepts or aspects within confidentiality which you need to consider. Now let's look at a few examples of confidentiality, right? So you have aspects of confidentiality around user access control, right? Where only HR department users should be able to access employee salary information, right? So employee salary information is confidential in nature, right? I am not supposed to know how much you are making as salary, or somebody outside the company must not know how much our employees are getting paid, right? So the only people who can have access is HR here, right? So this is an example of confidentiality which is applied to our day-to-day lives, right? Data encryption in transit. Let's look at another example. All sensitive emails and documents must be transmitted over SSL and TLS. SSL and TLS are encryption protocols which, when applied, right, they need to be applied for data when it is in transit over the internet, right? So there are three forms of data, right? Data at rest, when the data is in your database. Data in transit, when the data is traveling on the wire or when the data is traveling in the internet. And data in process, right? When the data is getting processed on a computer or on the processor. Now, data encryption in transit is important because when the data is moving in internet, right? Anybody and everybody can access it. Internet is a public ecosystem. Now, to ensure the confidentiality of sensitive emails and documents, we encrypt the data in transit as well, right? So these are the applications of confidentiality that we can see here, right? Moving on, I'll quickly spend some time on integrity, right? Integrity basically means that nobody should alter the data, right? Once the data is uploaded in a system, once the data is stored in a database, no unauthorized person should tamper the data, right? Integrity is about preventing unauthorized alterations of data. Now, integrity can be implemented by using controls such as hashing, access control, IDS, which is intrusion detection system, and input validation. Now, let me tell you uh, what is hashing, right? You see something here called as hash validation, right? Out here, hash validation. It basically means that, let's say, if I have a message called M, right? And when this message M, I pass it through an encryption algorithm, I get an encrypted message, right? Let me call this as EM1. Now, along with this EM1, what I'll also do is to this message 1, I'll create a hash function of this message, right? Hash is basically a format of data which cannot be reversed, right? Which is when I pass M1 through H, I get a hash value, right? Which cannot be reversed. It is irreversible, but it is very unique to this M1, right? Now, unless I give M1 to the hash value, this hash value can never be recreated, right? So now this message M1 has been encrypted. This message M1 has been hashed, right? So now we have EM1 and hash message HM1. Now let's say that this package is sent over internet, okay? Now if a hacker intercepts this message in the internet and he changes this data, right? Instead of EM1, what I have here is EM2 and I have a HM1. This is what I received at this end. Now, when the receiver receives this information, what he will do first, he will decrypt this data, right? So he'll pass this through a decryption algorithm. What he will get is a message M2, right? Now, what this receiver will also do is he'll pass this M2 through a hashing algorithm. Now, when he passes through, if you see this hashing algorithm and this hashing algorithm are the same. So what he will receive here is a HM2. Okay. So now what the receiver will do is he'll compare this with this HM1 and HM2. If you see clearly HM1 and HM2 are different, right? They are different because the attacker has altered this message while in the internet, right? So that is how we achieve integrity by making use of hashing. If you see the control as hashing, so what hashing will help us do is it will help us identify if there is somebody in the internet or somebody in the system has tampered with the data, right? If ideally what should happen is this HM1, when you encrypt this message, sorry, when you decrypt this message and do a hash of it, which we should get a match, right? HM1 and then here also HM1. But what we got is a HM1 and a HM2, right? So this is a serious red flag that somebody has attacked the message or intercepted the message, right? So this is about integrity. But we'll also spend some time on availability, right? So I'll spend a minute on this and then I'll do a quick time check, right? Availability is about ensuring timely and reliable access to systems and data. Like I told you, the example of e-commerce, where the availability of the application will have to be always high, right? Now, how do you achieve high availability? Is with the help of these controls like redundancy, backups, business continuity planning, and DDoS protection, right? Redundancy redundancy means that, for example, if I've hosted my e-commerce application in one server in India, right? Let me also host another instance of application in US, right? For example, if there is an earthquake in India or if there is a war within India, and if the application which is hosted in Indian location goes down, right? Then I can continue operations with the application which is hosted in US, right? So that is redundancy. Now let's talk about backup. Backup is something like, for example, if I'm working out of my iPad, right, which I'm doing right now, and if this iPad crashes, I will lose this presentation, right? So what I will do, I will back this up presentation in a Google Drive, right? And then all the updates that I'm making here, whatever I'm writing on this PPT while on this call, will also get backed up, right? Business continuity planning is around creating these backups and ensuring that your business continues even during a disaster or interruption, right? DDoS protection or denial of service protection. So in DDoS protection or denial of service is a kind of attack, right? So for example, let's say my name is Sai, right? Sai, at a point in time, I can only answer to one question from one person, right? Let's say if one of you unmutes yourself and then ask me a question, I can respond back. But if all of you, like 10, 20 people, unmute yourself and ask me a question, right? Will I be able to respond? No, right? So what will happen here is denial of service, right? I will deny my service of teaching here, what I'll do, I'll just shut down myself or close my ears, right? Similar to this, what attackers do is if there is one server also has a limitation of taking maybe 1,000 requests per second or 1,000 requests per minute. What attackers will do is they'll bombard the server with millions and millions of uh, millions and millions of requests. They take the help of bots, they take the help of malware and do this, right? Then what happens? This particular server crashes, right? So that is DDoS or a DOS attack. And DOS protection is a solution that protects from DDoS attacks, right? Now, this is about availability. Uh, and I've told you the examples of availability when it comes to e-commerce as well, right? So we spoke about that. I'll do a quick time check now. Rekha, how are we positioned on the time? I think we've almost spoken for an hour or a little more than that.